We will recommence the meeting then. I would like to welcome members and also viewers who may be watching our proceedings on Oireachtas TV to the public session of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children and Youth Affairs. The purpose of today's meeting is to meet with representatives of FORSA and to continue the Joint Committee's consideration on the topic of recruitment and retention of social workers. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to welcome Mr. Eamon Donnelly, Head of Division Health and Welfare at FORSA, and Mr. Bernard Cantillon, Social Worker at TUSLA. Before we commence in accordance with procedure, I am required to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17.2L of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence in connection with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise nor make charges against any person outside the House or an official either by name or in a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I also remind members and indeed our witnesses to please turn off your mobile phones or switch them to flight mode, as they may interfere with the sound system and make it difficult for parliamentary reporters to report the meeting. They do also adversely affect television and web streaming coverage. I wish to advise you that any submission or opening statements you make to the Joint Committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting, and after your presentation there will be indeed questions from members of the committee. So I now call on Mr. Donnelly to make your opening statement, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Will I stand up a bit? I can see it better.
No, if you could.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Please.
I can actually see it better standing up. However,
we'll
do a bit of distance reading.
We're a sitting house unless you're.
We're okay. Thank you. FORSA Trade Union welcomes the opportunity to present to the Joint Committee on Children and Youth Affairs in its capacity as the trade union which represents social workers in Ireland's public sector. The issue which generated this invitation to attend the meeting and to make a written submission is the matter on recruitment and retention of social workers. In the published TUSLA Business Plan 2017, there were 1,472.75 whole-time equivalent social work posts recorded. Of those WTE posts, 8% were vacant, generating 4,282 cases awaiting social worker allocation, 654 of which were deemed high priority. Based on an accepted norm of a running caseload of 15 cases per social worker, the deficit identified amounted to a minimum of 285 whole-time equivalent social workers. This situation has not improved in the intervening period. We have sent as an appendix to this statement a submission which was made to FORSA by the Union's Social Work Professional Committee within TUSLA, which outlines the views directly held by social workers regarding reasons for difficulty in retention of social workers. Common themes outlined directly by social workers include child protection work has become increasingly complex and more demanding, placing increased levels of stress on individual social workers, including the younger cohort of social workers which enters the system, many of whom by that stage do not yet carry high demand family responsibilities. As social workers become more experienced, there is a correlation between work demands and increased family pressures. An overwhelming percentage of social workers are female and find it increasingly difficult to achieve the level of work-life balance to cope with these added pressures. In addition, given the percentage of female employees in social work, it is inevitable that there will be large tranches of both maternity and parental leave. This, of course, is the most welcome condition of employment. However, the problem arises when replacement and backfilling strategies are both cumbersome and unproductive. This is clearly evidenced by the number of unallocated cases previously cited. Many young social workers who enter into the workforce are immediately challenged by the demanding nature of child protection social worker. Typically, these would be college graduates in the early to mid-20s age range who opt to travel, as an example, at a time in life when there is a better opportunity to so do. Unlike nursing or medicine, there is no real requirement to emigrate as far as, say, Australia to gain experience in the area of career development. The proximity of the NHS in the UK affords an opportunity for short-term emigration without too much upheaval, where experience can be gained in a universally accessible and more attractive health and social care system. The career pathway for social workers has not been examined for more than 15 years. despite the much changed environment and landscape of child protection in that time. Innovative ways need to be found to provide a gateway for college entrants to choose social work as a profession. On entry into the workforce, this gateway must be developed into a pathway whereby social workers can see the prospect of career progression as their levels of experience grow. Automatic advancement from basic grade to senior grade social worker based on protocols and checkpoints would provide a clear vision of career development at little or no cost to the state, as those levels of posts already exist in the system. In addition, having garnered years of experience, it is not uncommon for a social worker to excel in a particular area of expertise. The state, therefore, would greatly benefit from converting this specialist expertise into a model of advanced practitioner working. To complete the journey, this expertise and experience can be of further benefit if imported into posts which have responsibility for service planning and delivery. Due to the cumbersome nature of the recruitment processes, a market has been created for the use of agency staff. Therefore, a young social worker can choose to register with an agency and be assigned to work in a particular area. This has potential for a twofold negative on the system, in that firstly, the agency social worker is not committed to a durable post and is not tied down to it, and secondly, working conditions are much looser in areas such as pension contributions, etc. In Ireland, there is an increasing blame culture on the rise. TUSLA as an institution has been a headline victim of this culture in recent years. It is not unusual to hear calls to have TUSLA disbanded in the wake of a particular child protection controversy. This undoubtedly places a stigma upon the workforce at all levels, but most notably upon the social worker who is at the very centre of child protection work. By nature, a high percentage of child protection and social work issues in society are spread throughout urban areas. The associated cost of living in urban areas, which is reaching crisis point in this country, is restricting the attraction of social work as a career of choice. A formalised exit interview system must be used to analyse properly the reasons why such a relatively high percentage of social workers choose to leave TUSLA. Additionally, the change management culture in a relatively new organisation like TUSLA can often be driven as a priority reaction to negative media and public comment. It is often non-inclusive and creates additional demands on social workers without any sharing of a common vision. Your invitation to this meeting, Chair, also asked for real-life experiences of social workers. I have a short, anonymous statement from a social worker who is a couple of years in this system and, you know, is of the type of generation I spoke about on entry into the workforce, which I can read and forward to you if necessary. On an
I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, you could do your best to make sure that it's anonymous.
It's short, but we'll give you an insight, and if there's any questions, Bernard then would have the working experience to be able to deal with that. From having worked as a child protection social worker in the past number of years, there are a number of issues that I feel have contributed to the difficulties that social workers face on a day-to-day basis. There has been a lot of change in the past 24 months with regards to the restructuring of the child protection sector within TUSLA. Married with this, there has been a change with our approach to working with children and families to the Signs of Safety framework. The below are prevalent issues for social workers. Threshold of risk varies in different offices and counties. Therefore, assessments and decisions vary depending on teams, which makes it difficult when receiving cases previously known to social work involvement and plans being put in place with families. Nature of child protection. You need evidence before an action or plan is being put in place. Therefore, preventative intervention is lost, and social workers are working with families through risk management as opposed to supportive approach bringing about long-term positive change, which creates families understandably putting blocks to social work intervention. There's no clear guidance or procedures on founded or unfounded allegations for social workers. Safety planning is often not completed with families if allegations are retracted, often through coercion, despite concerns remaining for the children and families due to evidence no longer having weight because of retraction. Fast-paced nature of child protection work and high case loads blocks social workers from completing therapeutic direct work with families and children, therefore resulting in social workers relying on outside services to undertake work which guides our assessment, which can be a costly and time-consuming process. Work with children and families takes time, relationship building and meaningful engagement from social workers and families. Given availability of social workers, this is not always achievable, as mentioned, due to high caseloads. Staff retention is an issue within TUSLA at present. Therefore, staff turnover is frequently resulting in teams being unstable and inconsistent, often leaves teams low on numbers, resulting in social workers taking on colleague cases as well as their own. It proves difficult when emergencies occur with families that social workers are not familiar with regarding safety planning and interventions. Although Children First aims to put statutory obligations on professionals and members of the public to identify and report child protection concerns, this is still a huge difficulty that social workers face on a day-to-day basis, and there appears to be a lack of consequences for those not upholding their statutory obligations. As noted, intervention is based on concerns being evidenced. Drug use / alcoholism is only detected through positive screening or by client disclosure. My experience is that clients are not often open about their addiction, and therefore social workers rely on cooperation of GPs or screenings carried out by addiction services to carry out drug screenings. However, there is huge difficulty at present with GPs refusing to undertake such screenings, therefore causing difficulties in social workers identifying substance use and addressing the risk that this poses to children. There is no statutory obligation or guidance for GPs to work with social workers currently in place with regards to urine analysis. The fostering department are currently having huge difficulty with sourcing and keeping appropriate foster carers. Foster carers have reported to social workers on the child protection team that they feel that they have not received adequate training and preparation to care for children who often present with high needs and behaviours that are difficult for inexperienced carers to manage. This lack of training and support often results in placement breakdowns. This is problematic for children who have come into the care system, often experiencing instability, inconsistent care givers who continue to experience this whilst the care of TUSLA. Furthermore, as a social worker in the child protection, I feel that a lot of my work for children who are in care is supporting the foster carers, which is not my role. The fostering department are extremely busy at present and do not appear available to provide their carers the day-to-day support that foster carers require, resulting in the child social worker carrying out this work. Furthermore, I would have concerns regarding the efficiency of foster care assessments being carried out, as I've had significant concerns regarding foster carers that vulnerable children have been placed with. Whilst I can appreciate that foster placements are scarce, I would have concerns regarding foster carers being passed by committees who are not able to meet the emotional needs of children. Furthermore, there does not appear to be a functioning placement matching process in place to identify appropriate placement matches for children to foster carers, and it is seen as trial and error. Finally, there is a significant backlog of children in care cases transferring from child protection to children in care teams due to understaffing in the children in care teams. This results in social workers and the child protection team holding children in care caseload as well as child protection. So thank you for the opportunity to make this statement, which in addition to the appendix document forward can be taken as a written submission from Force on the issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Cantillan, do you wish to add anything at this stage?
Yeah, I suppose just I'd like to focus on the difficulties with placements and how that impacts, I suppose, on the work of individual social workers.
Please do.
I suppose in the Dublin region there's a particular difficulty in sourcing foster care placements for children, which I suppose has led to a situation where placements are being sourced through private agencies which are further down the country. So social workers are finding placements for children from the Dublin region in Wexford, Kilkenny, even into Munster, and in some cases I know of social workers who've sourced placements for children in Donegal. The responsibility for that case remains with the social worker in Dublin, despite the fact that the child is placed in Donegal or in Wexford, and the social worker has to visit that young person, which, whilst their caseload remains the same as though those children were placed in a Dublin placement. So social workers in Dublin find that they're travelling literally across the country to meet with the young people who they're responsible for, but there's no reflective reduction in their caseload to take account of the fact that they may, to visit a young person who's placed in Donegal, it may wipe out the entire day and indeed be beyond their usual working day to actually visit that young person, because they have to drive up and then drive back having visited the young person. And these issues place particular difficulties on young people, on social workers who are working in Dublin, and I suppose this is, I would see it as certainly something that a lot of colleagues would have said to me, I just can't do this anymore. I just can't have a situation where my work day begins really early in the morning because I have to visit a young person who's And Donegal is the extreme case, but there's lots of young people from Dublin who are placed in Cavan and Westmeath, and within the caseload I used to manage, I had young people in Wexford, across the Midlands, and you end up spending half a day just to attend a very short meeting with a young person's school, and you still have all your other cases to deal with, and that makes it particularly difficult, I suppose, for social workers. I think also the progression, because of the difficulties that there are in terms of recruitment of social workers and the children and care teams, which are the social workers who manage the caseloads of the children who are already in foster care. There's a difficulty in recruiting social workers, so there aren't enough social workers on those teams. So when a child protection concern comes in and a child is identified as needing to come into care, they're managed on the duty or child protection team for, it's meant to be almost instantaneously once they go into care that the social workers from the children and care team would take responsibility. But because there are no social workers there to take that responsibility, they remain on the caseload of the social workers at the duty end of the house, which means that they then are carrying a huge responsibility both for assessing all the cases coming in, but also carrying the cases which really should be on another team. So there's a huge amount of stress and pressure being put on individual social workers to manage this, and I suppose that's to do with the difficulty in recruitment of social workers. And I suppose there's also the reality that other areas of social work are, I suppose, because the caseloads, whilst I know our colleagues in other areas of social work would say that their caseloads are high, and absolutely they are, but in the particular case of child protection, the caseloads are unmanageable because of the lack of staff. And on an annual basis, we have a situation where in May and June, the local social work departments go and speak with the universities where the young people or where the new graduates are coming out, and they recruit practically everybody who wants to come into TUSLA is recruited at that point. And by September, October, the pool of people who wish to come into TUSLA has dried up. Another cohort of social workers who are experienced and so forth have left TUSLA, and the people who came in May and June start to leave. And by Christmas, usually there's nobody available to fill vacancies, and we wait again until June, July to fill those vacancies from the new round. And that cycle it's exhausting for social workers because they then have to carry the burden for all these other cases which are now unallocated.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much for that. There's a couple of questions, I suppose, arising from your opening statement, Mr. Donnelly, and a couple of other remarks that you might be able to cover as well before I open up to my colleagues. The advanced practitioner type model that you refer to, could you, I mean, I've done a little bit of reading on it, obviously this only just back from the election, so it's trying to get back into the swing of things, I'm sure you can imagine, no pun intended, but the advanced practitioner type model, I mean, how will that actually benefit, or the practicalities of introducing something along those lines?
Well, yeah, but you see, this was already examined in great detail 15 years ago, and it's a recommended model that everybody accepts. It just never happened. And the reason it benefits is that you can identify particular areas of critical need and match it up with particular areas of experience and expertise, and you can match them up. And that's the model. So you go from, and I always say that if you want to attract people into a career, first of all, you've got to make it attractive. But once you open that gateway, you've then got to create a pathway. So nobody's going to stay in a career that has no pathway. Part of that pathway is advancing to a more senior level. But a critical part of that pathway is to say, I've actually developed a range of experiences and I know that this is what I'm good at, this is my area of expertise. I know there's a societal need to deliver that. That's the model, and that's where you extract the best from people. Bernard might be able to maybe advance on that, but that's my concept of it, you know.
Sure. Okay. I suppose in terms of the advanced practitioner role, within child protection social work, I suppose there's a greater responsibility to go to court, to fulfil statutory needs and maybe in other areas of social work. There's a huge amount of responsibility, and there's also an almost continuous gaze of HICWA onto the work of individual social workers and the teams. And I suppose there's been a situation where experienced social workers have left to go to other areas of social work, and the reality on the ground is that the overwhelming majority of people who are working as social workers in child protection teams, particularly in the Dublin area, have only got a few years' experience, and the more experienced workers have either left or have moved down the country. So we end up with a situation where I suppose the experience of the team can be only a few years old, where you don't have that experience that goes back maybe half a decade, 2 decades, that maybe you would hope that you would have across a functioning team that actually, is nurturing its workers as they move through. It's about capturing that experience that you gain from having worked in a field for a long time, and actually rewarding people and saying, you have an expertise, and we're recognising that by creating a grade which actually reflects your level of expertise and the value you bring to the team. And indeed, in other areas of social work, there have been senior roles created and so forth, which have allowed people to almost advance without going through a separate recruitment process from their grade into other areas. And I think that makes those other roles in social work more attractive to people, as well as carrying less responsibility, as well as not having, I suppose, a situation where you feel you're under a constant public gaze through HICWA. And social workers welcome the work of HICWA in identifying flaws and failures in the system. But I think people sometimes feel that we're being assessed in a situation where we don't have the resources to solve the problems because we don't have the staff coming in, and we're not able to retain the expertise that would allow us to actually produce or to provide the best service we possibly could.
Mr. Johnny, you referenced a couple of times now the pathway and how it would benefit the system, but you also mentioned that it would have little or no cost to the state. You might go into. Is that in the scheme of things, or are you being literal?
You see, what happens is people generally, during their career, go from basic to senior anyway.
Sure. Through
longevity, for the ones that we hold on to. So, but what happens is there's panels created appointment panels of staff created all over the country. You've got movement then from one county to the next, and all of that type of stuff, right? There's gaps in creating the panels. There's recruitment problems in terms of the resources to set up all of these things. A previous report recommended, wouldn't it be better if you can advance from basic to senior grade, subject of course to criteria, checkpoints, quality control checkpoints and all. And what you do is you develop a continuity in the area rather than all of this this swamp that's caused by people, say, trying to access promotion, competing in other counties. They get a job in another county, they're then looking back to get back home and all of that type of stuff. So we see that it would be a better model.
Are there differentiating scales in salary? Yeah, the mics are automatic.
So, sorry, there are the basic grade comes in.
Would it change from region to region, or is it?
No, it's uniform.
Okay.
It's uniform.
Misunderstood you. So,
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, okay, I understand. One of the issues that arose when we discussed the education of social workers coming through the system was the trying to attract people from other sectors to come into the industry. So we discussed in particular the blended learning approach and bringing people in to try and attract them to the sector. Do you have any concerns in relation to that as an organisation or as a social worker yourself? Would you have any?
I suppose the only concern that I would have is that I suppose I want if colleagues are brought through some sort of a training scheme and that they are qualified to the same level of expectation as those of us who are already in the profession, and we don't want to create I suppose a type of social worker who is less qualified, and certainly we would not want to create a situation where there would be a type of social worker who is child protection social worker, but is not qualified to be able to work as a social worker. And I suppose there's a particular level of expertise and training which I think goes into making a social worker, which we don't want to create a separate type of social worker which isn't, I suppose, to this level that the rest of us are trained to.
Just add to that, if I may, Chair, just to say something that's slightly not provocative, but certainly would give food for thought. A lot of people who choose social worker profession, almost all, have a good social conscience. They want to do good things. Of course. Okay? And they want to advocate on behalf of the disadvantaged in society. And sometimes they come in their younger years with an expectation that they're going to be able to make a difference straight away. And then they can get choked in regulation and kind of the pressure when it seems like the roof is falling in because of the pressures, and it drives them away from it. And I think that's something that needs to be. I think you know, when you are educating people to be a social worker, I think it needs to be, you know, a clear part of the education curriculum that this is a tough gig, this is a tough station. It's not just about doing well for the community. And I think that's important. I don't mean to be flippant about that. I think that's very important.
No, great. Thank you for that, Mr. Donnelly. The only other area that I'd like to touch upon is given the nature of the role, given the number of full-time equivalent personnel that are not present and ever-increasing difficulties in recruiting them, then there has to be pressures from a practical perspective on recent graduates, trainees, if you will, coming through the system. And it's been referenced on a couple of occasions with previous witnesses to the committee. So I wonder if you could just maybe highlight, I don't particularly wish examples, or if you have them, it might be information to the committee that we could consider, but I mean, how would that impact upon the longevity of a person coming into a role if they're swamped? I mean, we were given evidence, and you referenced it yourself, Bernard, in regards to individuals driving all over the country in order to serve their client base, the children in question, and the difficulties that presents, particularly in the fact that the evidence provided to us was that they weren't being paid an allowance for that on the previous arrangement, where the supervising social worker would reimburse them, was, I believe, frowned upon or discontinued or something like that, and the difficulties that presents a trainee. So you might like to address or touch upon those.
Okay. I suppose one of the difficulties is that there seem to be different arrangements in different departments across the different areas within the city and across the country. And I suppose social workers in some areas are told that there's an expectation that they reduce their mileage as a mechanism to save money on mileage. In other areas, people are told that they can't use maybe a taxi to transport a young person, or because it costs money. And there's all these things add to the difficulty of doing the job. So you end up with a situation where sometimes people feel that they have a responsibility to visit a young person, but they can't get there at the easiest possible mechanism to get to that placement, whilst doing all of the work that they are actually expected to do. And I suppose there's a resource issue as well on a wider level, which creates a lot of difficulty. There are roles. I suppose the role of the social worker, in some parts of Tuesday, I suppose they end up doing a lot of administration work and a lot of roles which are actually social care roles. So we end up in situations where, because there are a lack of social care workers, which is a separate grade from social worker and a separate profession, because there are a lack of social workers end up taking responsibility for the supervision and facilitation of family access and contact, which adds to the stress of the social work role, because you're now not just responsible for managing the case and the care planning and so forth, you're also responsible for the physical bringing and collection of children from placements which are, maybe a child is placed in, let us say, Wexford, go collect that child, bring that child to Dublin to see their parents, and then drive that child back to Wexford after. So in essence, you're actually doing 4 trips in the day, so you're up, down, to make sure that this young person sees their family, and we want children to see their family. It's really important, but because we don't have the support staff to help us do those roles, social workers end up feeling we have to do everything. Also, the lack of admin staff in a lot of departments has led to a situation where social workers are doing practically all of their own filing, and there's no, in many offices, there's no support to help with filing for social workers because there aren't enough admin staff. And I know that often there's a public perception that there are too many admin staff in the HSE or TUSLA, but certainly the experience of social workers on the ground is that that's not true, because we need the support of our colleagues in admin, but we just need more of them.
Just as a matter of interest, Mr. Dunn, do you happen to know what the WTE equivalent of administrative staff in TUSLA is? Just off the top of your head, or would you have an idea?
No, but it generally, I think administrative staff generally runs at about 11%.
That's just it. Just interesting.
It wouldn't be that, Chair. It wouldn't be hugely different from the HSE, because the scalar model was based on what it previously was. You know.
Okay. No, thank you both for that. Deputy Mitchell, please.
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation today. Just a few quick questions. How many social workers are actually members of the union?
I couldn't give you a figure about how many, but I can say that we're running at about 45%.
Okay. And so the 45%, I'm just wondering, like, contact with the union, would you have many ringing up about their working environment, concerns they have?
You see, the way we're structured, we have representatives on the ground who field a lot of that stuff. Yeah. We work through a professional committee. Yeah. And Bernard would be familiar with that professional committee. So we would regularly meet that professional committee who feed all this stuff, because it's a huge network. Right? But I would say the professional committee within TUSLA would have been the ones that kind of gathered this type of information for us. So it wasn't a question of just sitting down and kind of writing a kind of an opinion piece. I mean, this is based on stuff that we'd gather on a regular basis. You know? Okay.
And just on that way, you're speaking there, you gave us an appendix, right? And I think there's bits of it that...
That's what the group put together, yeah.
What the group put together, not saying yourself, but the group collectively. But they're like, we're talking about 49 social worker posts are in Dublin North East, right? So is that fact, there's 49?
Oh, they're based on census reports.
Right, okay. So we've 104 vacant posts in that region of Dublin, is that correct?
I suppose Dublin North East is the... TUSLA is structured, it has 4 regions, and Dublin North East is practically all the north side of Dublin, Louth, Meath, Cavan and Monaghan.
I'm aware of that. So, but what I know the region, that's what it's named.
Sorry.
But I just want to touch on the thing where you're saying that there's 104 vacant posts in that.
Well, at the time of the census that they took that from, that would have been the case, but it wouldn't have dramatically changed since. Because the pace of things hasn't moved.
Right.
No?
So therefore, we're saying that we've 104 vacant posts. How many cases would the social workers then in that region have?
Well, they currently run at about 15 per social worker, 15 live cases.
Yeah, 15 live.
Yeah, like it's not you don't it's about 15 is the kind of the running tally of cases that you have. So there's
not any extra.
There's 1,560 cases by my arithmetic.
And I suppose just on the 15 cases, whilst there's a commitment from TUSLA recently that would be 15 cases per social worker. That hasn't been adhered to in all cases, and social workers are carrying
there
higher.
Is social workers carrying higher cases.
But the reality is that there's a lack of social workers on the ground.
Just on that, what would the highest that you're aware of a social worker carrying?
I suppose in my own experience, I was aware of a social worker carrying about 50 cases, but that was extremely unusual. I'll admit that was extremely unusual. But in my old role before, I work in an emergency setting at the moment, but I worked previously in a children in care role, and I carried just over 20 cases, which was beyond.
Obviously, there are increased and decreased complexities per case, but I mean, but I think there's an acceptance out there that like 15 is as tough as it should get, as a kind of a rule of thumb.
But just say in other countries, what would the load be? You know, in comparison, say, to the UK, what is 15 average?
I'm not actually sure of that. I don't have the figures for the UK.
We're not comparing here to any other.
I suppose in the UK, social work is structured as well slightly different, because often I think it's part of a community care department. So social work in different counties in the UK can be structured either on a child protection basis, or it can be structured on a sort of generic social work department for that county, which can carry child protection, but also carry elder abuse and a whole lot of other.
Well, I can absolutely confirm for you though, and I'm rooting for it. I didn't want to. I was told we had 5 minutes, so I didn't want to overload. But per capita, we have a far reduced number of social workers per head of population than the other comparative countries. And with that, we can forward you anything you need on that. I'd say Tusta probably have anyway. You know.
No, it's just for the fact that I have a personal interest in this myself, and I know the turnover of social workers, particularly in the region that we've highlighted, is high, and the knock-on effects that actually has on the children that are in care. Because you know yourself, being a social worker, these children are building relationships, you know, with social workers who end up moving on.
Yes.
So there's a knock-on effect, and on children, somebody else new comes in, and they can be. There is cases where there's children in care for a short space of time, or up to at least their 9th social worker now. So that in itself has an effect on the children that we're looking at. But I'm just concerned in around, why are we losing these social workers constantly, right? We've heard the background. Is it like when you're talking about these social workers have 15 cases? Can you just tell us what it's like day to day if I was that social worker? What is expected of me? What have I to do in my role?
Yeah, I suppose, well, this is the ideal situation if you had just 15 cases. I suppose in that scenario you'd expect that, and it was carrying a caseload of children in care, I suppose you'd be expected to facilitate the care planning for that young person. So you'd have to meet with the young person or the child and try and do a little piece of work around what are the things they want, what are their wishes, but also explaining why they're in care and why the various things that are happening in their life are happening. Because children always have questions as to, well, why am I here? Why don't I live with my mum and dad? You would also, if there are court proceedings taking place, you'd be expected to write and compile court reports to link in with other professionals and I suppose get solicited reports from those other professionals on what's happening for the young people, maybe trying to get reports from speech and language therapists, OTs, GPs, psychiatrists, psychologists, and you're constantly having conversations, you're holding meetings with those other professionals, you're chairing those meetings, you're bringing everyone together, you're travelling to those meetings, you're meeting with families to try and look at the supports in the wider family. You're holding, we call them family welfare conferences, and whilst a meeting might take an hour to take place, there could be days or weeks of planning have gone into that. You will have had to meet with individual relatives to actually explain to them why we're having this process and how they can actually be part of the process, and to maybe allow them time to think about what they can bring to that meeting, because you don't just want to bring everyone to the meeting and kind of them all turn to the social worker and go, well, what are we going to do? It's about helping people to actually work as well with what they can bring to the table to help their relative who may be experiencing a situation where they need to be.
But you raise a very interesting point, Deputy, about building the relationships with some people call it clientele. It's not a word I like, but there's, the people in society that we're assisting. If you go back to the model that we suggested about advancement, there will be far less movement. It's not just that we're losing social workers. They hop around from one place to the other, and that compromises the relationship building to which you refer.
No, it's just that the fact that there's, when you see some fantastic social workers moving on to work in the health profession, so why is it more attractive over there? And this is the question, the answer I'm trying to get at you. Why do social workers move in, from particularly child protection. Now, we have to admit, it is a very hard role, and there's excellent social workers moving on to other departments. So why is the grass greener over the other side is what I'm trying to get.
I can answer a big question on that, and that is about the blame culture. I can say to you that, and this doesn't refer to social workers, it refers to all the staff in Tusla, right? There is every time there's a controversy, you see, when you say things like you can't stop every child protection issue from going wrong, you can't, right? But every time somebody looks for a scapegoat, it comes down to the organisation, there's a blame culture there. It's very, very difficult to continue to work at the epicentre of that. And if the health service provides a different option, maybe to work in primary care or something, as part of a multidisciplinary team, I'm now in with speech and language, I'm now in with and I'm helping in a different way, that's an attraction.
Can I just ask the question, just to follow up on what supports do TUSA provide for the frontline staff in such circumstances, in that controversial public event, which unfortunately is a regular occurrence? But
this could be a short answer.
I think, like, at times when we've had reports which are going to attract quite a lot of public attention, and where the public is likely to be pretty appalled at something that has happened, we, I suppose, management have sent us an email informing us that this is likely to happen, but there haven't really been any supports provided. Like, I suppose you can talk to your manager, but
I am aware that certainly at the, you know, thinking around the committee and the chair, there is an appreciation that that is our problem. You know, I'm aware that that's the case, and I think people need to, you know, get after that a bit.
I think, and I suppose I have a comment on that, I suppose, as well, that one of the things that happens, let's say if something happens in the HSE and occasionally a terrible thing happens to somebody who's had an experience with the HSE, and the public becomes aware of it. People rarely go on forums online or start posting on social media that they want the HSE immediately abolished, because they can see value in other areas of the HSE. And they have an interaction with the HSE where they have familiarity. Most people have been to a hospital. Most people have been to their GP. Most people have attended a consultant at some point in their life. Whereas with TUSLA, it's a bit of an unknown. Most people, when they have had a positive experience with TUSLA, generally don't tend to broadcast it to their neighbours. And that's for understandable reasons. People don't want to admit that there was a problem which caused TUSLA to be involved in their life. So often people think that TUSLA is this kind of distant body which is engaged in something just a little bit, you know, maybe nefarious or whatever, and because they don't know what it's doing, and they're not really sure what the role of a social worker is, and so in that gap, and there isn't really a lot of information, I suppose, provided by TUSLA as to, well, I suppose TUSLA does try, to be fair, to tell the public what it does, but at the same time, when, let's say, a scandal breaks, because the issues usually pertain to an individual, the standard response from the agency tends to be that it can't comment on individual cases. But a lot of workers find, I suppose, that can be quite dispiriting, because in some ways the public is enraged about something, but nobody seems to be saying, well, this is why the social workers in that case had to act in this manner, and it's not really explained, and that can be difficult. You
raised a point there about social workers supporting the foster parents as well. So am I taking from that there's a shortage of link, you know, foster care social workers, you know, that predominantly looks after the families, or link workers, and
there are a shortage of fostering social workers. I suppose I prefer the term fostering social workers, because they certainly there's been some thought put into the idea that the link worker for foster carers would not need to be a social worker, and I suppose the professional committee in Forsa for social workers doesn't agree with that. We think that it's important that people have a social worker. All areas of TUSLA have a shortage of social workers, and it's an ongoing difficulty. So I suppose we end up with a situation where TUSLA has become very reliant on private agencies in some areas to private fostering agencies to meet its need for foster placements, which has, I suppose, it's almost as a result of the fact that it doesn't have enough social workers to conduct the assessments and to do the recruitment to bring foster carers in. But because there's a shortage of social workers, or maybe there's a high turnover of social workers within departments, it actually makes the private agencies more attractive to those who want to become a foster carer, because they know that they will always have an allocated social worker, that there'll be a smaller caseload for that social worker. I've heard in some cases of the private agencies having 6 and 7 cases to a social worker, whereas social workers who are working in fostering within TUSLA are carrying far higher cases.
Right.
So.
And can we just to finish up on a quick one as well? So basically, we have social workers who's doing it. There is cases of social workers doing everything. They're supporting the foster carers. They're also doing their work for the children, and plus they're doing access. Right. So is there a case should be made where access workers, like, are we even that bad in TUSLA that we're short of access workers? You know, people to do access for children. Are we down to the bare bones?
We have a shortage of access workers. I can't speak for every area within TUSLA, but certainly the experience of social workers in Dublin is there are not enough social care workers on the teams to actually be able to facilitate access. Because of the fact, I suppose, social workers ultimately carry responsibility for the case and the legal responsibility for the case. So when social workers return to court to explain what's happening in this case, it's almost impossible to say, well, I couldn't facilitate the access with this young person and their parent, so it just didn't happen because I had other things to do. And the courts obviously find that unacceptable. And social workers ourselves, we don't find we don't want to cancel children's time with their family to do other things, so we end up doing it, but then the stress of the job then becomes unbearable and social workers leave.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mitchell. Deputy Neville, please.
Thanks for coming in, guys. We had Pat Rabbitte in a couple of weeks ago and asked him a number of questions in relation to social workers and the recruitment side of it. From your figures, you may not have them to hand today, but what percentage of vacancies are outstanding, social workers? How many are backfills and how many are new positions? What is the turnover rate, the turnover rate of social workers within the organisation? If we could start there, I'll probably have a few more questions following on that. If you don't have, I don't expect.
I don't have those figures now, but we can.
Even generally, even if you have them after that.
I don't have those figures now.
You can send them on to me.
We do have access to them.
Actually,
I think we do have them behind you.
Yeah,
they're behind you.
If we could send them on just to our email.
Yeah, we can send them on to you. But the picture that we painted about the 8% vacancies. I don't think that's changed dramatically.
Right.
You know, certainly the recruitment processes haven't speeded up, so there'd be no reason for it to change. So
yeah, but what I'm trying to ascertain is how many is a backfill and how many is a new vacancy, because a backfill is obviously
that information is broken down in a document that's been. Yeah,
that's great. Because obviously what I'm trying to ascertain, going back to your point, saying that people are actually going into the system, finding it too difficult and falling out of the system, as opposed to the other tranche of jobs, which would be for new entrants that wouldn't be in the system already. Has anybody come across from the HSE or any other entities to TUSLA, or is it always one-way traffic from TUSLA to?
It's not always one-way traffic, but there's certainly 2 lanes on one side of the road and 1 lane on the other.
And has there been an examination of why people came from the HSE, for argument's sake, to TUSLA?
It's usually on promotion.
Okay, so it's for those sectors, right? You were saying that there's no exit interview for anybody leaving whatsoever.
I'm not saying there's no exit interview, but there's no formulaic system of exit interviews. You may have a good practitioner in a particular area saying, it's my policy in this area to find out, but that's a kind of a self-starter initiative. There's no formulaic system.
There's no company HR policy to say that it should be an exit interview for anybody leaving. Okay.
So and therefore, by definition, then there's no real analysis of what the reason is. Yeah.
All right. Has that ever been sought by the unions or asked by the unions of management?
Oh, we've been seeking that, but again, I don't want to create the impression that when you approach the people who run, for example, HR department in Tusla, that you get a closed door. You don't. You don't. Sometimes what happens in an area like Tusla is other things take over, and it's one of the well-intentioned things that we all mean to do, but we don't do.
Well, look, I mean, I'll be straight with you here. I've worked in recruitment for 8 years before I came in here. From my point of view and from my professional opinion, it's pretty easy to put a policy in to have an exit interview when somebody leaves. It's a sheet of paper, and you have specific questions on it, maybe 8 to 10 to 12 questions on it. You can get your analysis from that. So that'd be my own subjective opinion now, given what I've come through. And I understand what you're saying with these meetings, that other things get in the way, but the other thing I want to ask is, how often do you meet with management as a union?
You see, it's a kind of subjective question, because meetings happen every day of the week in various areas. But from a corporate point of view, let's say we would have regular monthly meetings with the HR agenda.
And that would be in relation to management. Okay, I don't want to get too much into the intricacies, because I understand there's sensitivity and information, but I'm trying to get a hold of the relationship between the unions and management. Are these issues, like you, I mean, I'm hearing these issues constantly for the last 12 or 18 months. Are these being communicated concurrently in those monthly meetings as a matter of priority, that these processes need to change, or are the organisation going to hemorrhage?
I can cover that question by saying we're all clear about what the issues are. There's been no lack of identification of what the issues are, right? I would say the human resources function in Tusla is probably undernourished itself. Right. Therefore, it finds itself firefighting a lot of the time, and some of the things that you mean to do become this is an intention, and we must get around to it. There's also a little bit of restructuring fatigue insofar as you've had a succession of chief executives who decide, well, I think I'm going to set up directorates in such a way and such a way. And so that puts a huge draw on HR departments, right? And sometimes it gets them talking about stuff where we'd rather be talking about other stuff. But what I can assure you is that the actual working relationship between the union and the people who are charged with those tasks is good. It's healthy. Good
to hear. So do you believe, from what you said there, that there's too much focus on change management all the time without an actual focus on a demand-driven service or a customer-focused service? Not borrowing from the private sector, but what you're saying there is that there's so many changes going on all the time that they're actually eyes off the ball on what the demand drive is at the front end of the organisation.
Yeah, but some of that's driven by private sector commentary on the basis that Tusla, as a public organisation, again, if there is slippage or a controversy, everybody said this is because it's a public service. It doesn't work to this standard, that standard, and the other standard. Like, I mean, for example, anytime there's a scandal, the immediate thing is we better introduce a policy to react to that scandal. That's not systematic planning. Okay? And what I'm saying to you is that, and it's also an agency that's only in existence since 2014. That's right, it's relatively young. And what I think is that in an effort to try and cope with all of the outside pressures, I think you're probably right, Deputy, that there's a kind of a focus on, change culture, change culture, change culture. And you need to keep your nerve in this industry. You need to say, look, we have a vision that's 5 or 10 years. We're going to work towards that. We're going to meet a few lumps and bumps on the way. And look, something that we've identified here, why are so many people leaving? Well, we need to ask ourselves that question. We need to have a systematic approach to finding out why that is. And we need to make that a priority. Not we need to all of a sudden write up some policy because something went wrong and it was on the radio. And I think there's a bit of that, you know.
Okay. In relation to the recruitment process itself, what is the recruitment process or the length of recruitment process to hire a social worker?
Well, recruitment in the public service is a bit of a monster because of Garda checks, and which are necessary, because of fields of competition, because of the egalitarian nature of the competition and the field you have to go to and all that. It takes time. It takes time. But in my view, and because of the way, say, public expenditure and the Department of Health would sit on whole-time equivalents in terms of managing public service expenditure, it's always a case that when the vacancy arises. There's a reaction to that. There's a natural gap that takes place. There's no kind of you could nearly have constant panels for social workers, the way things have gone in Tussle.
But that's going to bring me on to my next point in relation to panels. Obviously, what we've been told here is the panels are quite rigid in relation to areas, or CHO areas, that there's no flexibility or fluidity within panels. Is that correct?
There is flexibility. There's flexibility within panels. In fact, I would argue that, again, back to my point about career progression, people mightn't jump from one area to the other if there was a system of career progression. But no, I just think that the recruitment. But we're in a conversation in the HSE with National Recruitment Services about the problems that recruitment is causing, not just in social work, everywhere. It's a cumbersome process.
I know that, but what I'm trying to ascertain in here is there anything within the recruitment process itself that can help us get social workers in or attract social workers, as opposed to vis-a-vis salary, or opposed to, well, there's more attractive positions abroad? Is there bottlenecks within the process that people are going, you know what, I'm not going to go through this, it's going to take me 12 months to get this job, and in the intervening 12 months I've got a job somewhere else?
The bottlenecks are generally caused by seeking sanction.
How do you mean?
You have to seek sanction from the government departments.
Right.
So it's not just a question of, oh, we have a gap here, we'll go and advertise. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
You've got to seek sanction. You've got to get and then a department will then have to go to another government department to seek sanction. And by the time that comes back, the vacancy picture and landscape has already changed.
Yeah.
So sometimes you advertise, right? You create a panel, you think it's fit for purpose.
Yeah.
By the time you call people off that panel, you put one bubble out on the wallpaper and another bubble jumps up. So I'm saying that there needs to be a systematic look at recruitment and to do it in a different way. And maybe we might need some outside expertise on that. I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. No, that's just fair comment.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the agencies, is there an exit interview? You mightn't be able to answer this, and I could well appreciate it. Is there an exit interview conducted by the agencies who would have staff in that may fall out of the system?
That I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
Can we ascertain that information? Ask if there's agencies.
So if an agency worker comes in,
because oftentimes agency, I worked in recruitment agency, you would conduct an exit interview because obviously as a recruiter, your contractor is now dropped out. So revenue-wise, you're now going, your boss goes, what's happening here? The revenue's not coming in. What happened? Please do an appraisal. Yeah. So if we had stats around even why agency workers, at least to give us some sort of anecdotal evidence that we could grab onto, I think would be helpful. But going back to the panels, I work on the mental health side as well. I sit in the mental health committee, and what was been coming back with us was the fact that there's not enough kind of local recruitment drives. It's a bit more regional, a bit more national. Do you find the same thing in relation to Tussle, that you don't have that local flexibility in the recruitment drives? Or is there disparities between the amount of social workers required in one part of the country as vis-a-vis another part of the country?
I see, my difficulty here is that my colleague behind you deals directly with Tussle and would be more familiar with the
That's fine.
recruitment
No, like I said, I appreciate if you can't answer the question. Just if we can be provided with the information, it would be fantastic. If you have
what I can say to you is that it has been union policy and it's a subject of discussion.
Right.
With the HSE, for example, to go back to regionalisation of recruitment for that very reason.
How long has that been in discussion?
It's in recent months. In recent months, the national recruitment system in the HSE it's way beyond capacity.
Okay.
Way beyond capacity. So if you're moving to let's say a health and social care system, which is being, say in Sláintecare, is being devolved back out into regional integrated care organisations, for example, recruitment will have to migrate with that. There's no doubt about that, and I think that model should go into Tussle as well.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Appreciate it. I just want to put one thing on the record here, Chair, and we need to specifically push this, is the fact that we have to recognise the good work that is done by the social workers in the system and by Tussle, given what was mentioned here today about what has been arising in relation to a blame culture, that 99.9% of the work that's done that we don't see, as you quite rightly said, that people aren't going to be shouting from the rooftops, is good work that is done by these members, and we have to, us as a house, and obviously look at maybe some sort of communication strategy to start getting that message out there to attract people in. The second thing I'd like to say is that in relation to support of social workers, a lot of the issues you mentioned around there, particularly young people coming in, would have a vision or an ideology in relation to social work, and that's welcome. but also a lot of the skills that you mentioned there are actually business skills like project management, meeting coordination, and also relationship building skills, and that should be probably part of, again, this is my ignorance, if it's not part of the education of getting those social workers to where they are, that should be looked at as well, because there's a huge amount of project management involved from what has been articulated today, and that needs to be pushed as well. There's business skills as well as social skills required there.
Thanks, Deputy Neville. And I have no difficulty whatsoever echoing your remarks about the good work that's done, and I suppose it's very unfortunate as somebody who gets advanced copies of HICWA reports probably once or twice a month. It can be particularly difficult going through them because I know precisely the nature of the headlines that it will feature the following day. So, closing remarks, I suppose, if you wish.
I suppose just on and you mentioned HICWA, and I suppose, and I mentioned earlier the fact that I think nearly every social worker welcomes that HICWA has actually served to improve standards and to improve, I suppose, the service that is provided to children and families who come into contact with TUSLA. But when HICWA identifies a difficulty, HICWA tends to come back, and then HICWA comes back, and I suppose there's a fatigue of assessment and a fatigue of being under the prism of an investigation. And I know that some of the areas within TUSLA, I know the Dublin South Central area has recently had several investigations from HICWA, and it puts an awful lot of pressure on social workers in those areas, because they feel that not only are they responsible for their day-to-day work, but they're also then responsible for providing their files to investigators from HICWA who want to inspect them and who want to go through them with them, and they feel like, it's like you're constantly being brought in for interview to explain, well, what's happening here, why is this happening? And so many of these things come back to the lack of staff, but individual social workers feel that they're the ones under the gaze of HICWA taking the responsibility for it.
I understand, and it has been that way for some time, and I don't expect it will change significantly in the near future. But we can aspire to improve the position. But if that's it, then I thank our guests on behalf of the committee for your opening statement and indeed dealing with the members' questions so comprehensively. The meeting of the Joint Committee is adjourned until Tuesday, 11th of June, 12:30, when the committee will meet with representatives of Focus Ireland to begin its consideration of the topic of impact of homelessness on children. Thank you.